If you get any kind of help right now, food benefits, housing, childcare, cash assistance, you need to hear about this because Congress is considering a new bill that could completely rewrite the rules of the game. This new bill could eliminate programs like SNAP and Section 8 in some states, instead, replacing it with a single untested grant program that could change everything about who is eligible and how you get help. It's being sold as a way to simplify or streamline your benefits, but there are some serious red flags buried beneath all of that boring procedural language. So, today we're going to dive into what the new Upward Mobility Act of 2026 is proposing, who would be affected, why some people are supporting it, and how changes like this have catastrophically backfired in the past. Because this isn't the first time that the government has tried something like this, and it usually ends up a disaster for the low income people who actually need help. So, with that, let's dive in. Right now, you know that most benefit programs work like separate buckets. SNAP has its own rules, Section 8 has its own, and LIHEAP has another, and so on. Each program has its own rules about who qualifies, how much help you can get, how to apply, how often you have to reapply, how it works, and all of that. If you've ever tried to get help from more than one program, you already know what a headache that can be. Well, the Upward Mobility Act wants to knock down all the walls between those programs. Instead of having separate funds for each one, states could choose to dump all of that money into one separate pot called an Upward Mobility Grant. And they could make up their own new rules about who qualifies, how it's used, everything about how it works. The idea, at least on paper, is that states could use that money more flexibly and create programs that actually work together instead of forcing families to just jump through 10 different hoops. They say it'll make it easier for you to get help and easier for the state to get you that help. The way that they've explained it makes it sound like an easy, no brainer win win scenario. Now, the lawmakers who introduced this bill say that it's necessary because our current system has a lot of loopholes and rules that just don't make sense, like marriage penalties and the benefits cliff. The benefits cliff is a big one, and I'm sure you've heard about this. It's what happens when a small increase in your earnings, like a little raise or a few extra hours at work, causes you to actually lose your benefits, usually entirely. Because programs like SNAP often have strict income limits, earning an extra $100 in wages can trigger the loss of, say, $400 or more in benefits. This can leave you worse off financially than you were before the raise, and it can feel like the system is punishing you for trying to get ahead, and it realistically just traps you in poverty. The benefits cliff isn't just a theory, it's something that happens to real people every day. According to Deseret News, quote, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta found that a single parent with one child living on public assistance in Washington, D.C., saw their annual earnings rise from $11,000 to $65,000, they would receive no financial benefit. Due to benefit cliffs, the lost financial assistance outpaces the increased earnings, end quote. Now, studies in various states have shown that somewhere between 20% to 50% of benefit recipients have turned down a job or a promotion in order to protect their benefits. In some cases, an increase of around $1,000 a year in income can slash $25,000 or more in benefits, which can really wreck a family's budget and make it an impossible situation to navigate. That's obviously a problem, which is why the Upward Mobility Act proposes a slow slope instead of a cliff. This bill is supposed to ensure that you'll never lose more than 50 cents in benefits and taxes for every dollar that you gain in earnings. It's meant to guarantee that working more always puts more money in your pocket and you don't lose when you try to get ahead. Now, that 50-cent rule sounds like a dream for anyone trying to work their way up. But here is where the Upward Mobility Act stops being a helping hand and starts looking like a massive gamble. To give states the power to build these new slopes, the bill removes almost all federal oversight. It effectively hands your food, your housing, and your child care money over to state politicians in a block grant with very few strings attached. And if history has taught us anything, it's that when the federal government stops watching that money, low-income families are usually the ones who pay the price. If you don't believe me, stick around because later in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what happened the last time they tried that because it did not end well for the people who needed help. Now, the good news is that this time at least, they aren't planning to immediately make these changes everywhere at once. If this bill passes, they will select up to 5 test subject states to run this as a 5-year experiment. You can think of this like a test drive. Even for those 5 states, the act doesn't force the state to switch everyone over at once. Instead, states can launch what's called a limited scope pilot project. This allows them to try the new upward mobility grants in maybe just a specific area, like a single county or city, while the rest of the state keeps their traditional SNAP benefits and other things exactly as they are. Or they could even cherry pick who's in the pilot, as long as they don't violate federal civil rights or discrimination laws. But please, don't let that pilot program label fool you into a false sense of security here. This is not a small test. This is proposing a massive welfare overhaul that could affect millions. And if these 5 states can prove that this works based on their own definition of success, this could very well become the new reality for every EBT card and Section 8 voucher in America. So everyone needs to pay attention to this because this could be a peek at what they want to see in the future of your benefits. So let's be really clear about how they're planning to do this. The funding for these Upward Mobility Act grants aren't coming out of thin air. That money is coming from the programs you're already using. The states chosen for this would be allowed to basically cannibalize funding from 10 of the most popular low-income assistance programs out there, meaning that these highly effective existing programs would stop for the people in these pilots, and that money would be used for something entirely new. And when I say programs, I don't mean that loosely. The bill actually lists the 10 programs they could use. It includes SNAP food assistance, both the administrative funding and the actual benefit money that you usually get on your EBT card every month. It includes TANF cash assistance, childcare subsidies, LIHEAP energy assistance. It also includes workforce funding for dislocated workers, community development block grant funding, and the major housing programs like Section 8 vouchers, public housing funding, and even rural rental assistance. The bill says that the states could use all of these or just some of these. But depending on what your state chooses, that may mean that these programs would stop for you and all that money would be diverted into these new upward mobility grants. The bill is very clear that states would get to make decisions about who is eligible, how the funds would be used, how much help you could get, everything. To make this bill work, there's very little that they would not be allowed to change. Under the Upward Mobility Act, states would still have to follow certain federal laws. The things that they are not allowed to change would basically be limited to civil rights, they can't discriminate against you, labor standards, meaning that minimum wage and child labor laws have to stay the same, citizenship rules, meaning that the federal rules about who is eligible based on immigration status couldn't be changed, health and safety, meaning that they can't waive basic safety standards for things like housing or food, and religious freedom, meaning that your right to choose or not choose a religious provider would be protected. There are also some big hands-off rules for the money itself. States cannot take money that was meant for the tribes, and they can't change their maintenance of effort rules, which has to do with how much money the state has to spend of its own funds. And specifically for housing, the bill also says that money for things like Section 8 still have to go through the local housing agencies that you're used to dealing with. So while states cannot ignore your civil rights or force you into unsafe housing, they can rewrite the rules on how much food assistance you get, how that food assistance is administered, and everything else. So the programs that you rely on could be fundamentally changed in some major ways. So enough about all the legal jargon. Let's talk about what matters most, how this could affect your life. We're talking about your grocery budget, your rent money, and whether or not your family has a safety net when things get tough. Because when federal rules go away, the reality of your benefits can change significantly. There are a few big ways that this could affect you. So first, the end of guaranteed help. Right now, SNAP is considered an entitlement program. That means that if you qualify, you get that help, period. It doesn't matter how many other people in your area are getting it. But this upward mobility grant bill would dissolve that and let the states roll that money into a block grant. That's how Section 8 and LIHEAP work. And in those programs, you can be 100% eligible and still be put on a waiting list for years because the state ran out of money. SNAP doesn't operate that way right now, but if your state chooses to roll that SNAP funding into these upward mobility grants, that could potentially change, and that would be disastrous. Second, this also creates a sort of one strike failure point. When you bundle your SNAP, your housing, and your childcare into one upward mobility pot, you create a single point of failure. Right now, if you make a paperwork mistake on your housing recertification, it might affect your housing, but your EBT card should still be working to feed your kids. But under this new model, everything is tied to the same file. So one denial, one missed deadline, or one administrative error could potentially trigger a total blackout of all of your assistance at once. The Act even says that people who get help through the Upward Mobility Grants program would not be eligible for any benefits outside of that unless there was some sort of crisis like a natural disaster or a public health emergency that created an exception. So instead of your usual safety net, you could end up with a single thread that could easily snap. And third, this is important, they want to apply the new SNAP work requirements to everything, including your housing. If you couldn't find enough hours at work, or if your car breaks down, or if you have a problem, you wouldn't just be risking your food money anymore. You could be losing the roof over your head and everything else too. This is especially concerning, of course, for seniors and people with disabilities who rely on these programs, because by expanding those work requirements and tying funding for this to your state's employment metrics and success in spending less and getting people off programs, the legislation creates a financial incentive for states to prioritize the most employable participants over those with greater needs. While the Act explicitly forbids waiving civil rights protections, the broad flexibility granted to states to redesign eligibility rules and everything else leaves open the possibility that states could design their systems in ways that deprioritize or reduce support for people who cannot work full time. Essentially, this act is all about getting the government to trade your security for their flexibility. And if you're the one living paycheck to paycheck, you know exactly which one of those is more important. And unfortunately, history shows us that when states are given broad flexibility like this, it often ends up badly for those who need help the most. And that brings us to what I personally think is one of the reddest of all the red flags in this entire proposal. The bill states that if a state saves money, meaning they spend less on benefits now than they did before, then they get to keep the leftover money. They can put that extra cash into a state reserve fund or spend it on a community facility or something like that. Now, that sounds nice in a press release, but in the real world, this creates a dangerous incentive, because the easiest way for a state to save money isn't by lifting you out of poverty, it's by making sure you never get help in the first place. So think about it. Every time a state cuts eligibility or adds more paperwork or makes it easier for you to lose those benefits, they aren't just streamlining, they're literally earning a reward for the state budget. The less they spend on you, the more they can keep for themselves. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, we actually have some receipts, because we've seen exactly how this flexibility plays out when states get a hold of a block grant. Back in 1996, the government did this with TANF cash assistance. They sold it as a way to reduce dependency, encourage work, and so on. But in reality, it became a disaster. Over time, states realized that they could use that money for things that had nothing to do with directly helping families pay rent or buy diapers or get help. In Mississippi, the number of families getting help plummeted, while millions of dollars in welfare funds were diverted to pet projects for the wealthy. We're talking about $1.1 million paid to an NFL quarterback for speeches he never gave, and another $1.3 million on a fitness camp that state legislators attended for free, and so much more. When the federal government stops watching the money and starts rewarding states for spending less, the most vulnerable people are the ones who get left behind first. In fact, for every federal dollar budgeted for TANF, poor families received just 22 cents. The rest was eaten up with other things. And here's the kicker. When those TANF rules changed, some states stopped spending the money altogether. In 2020, Tennessee was sitting on $790 million in unspent welfare funds while having one of the highest child poverty rates in the country. That is why this is such a big red flag to me. This new bill literally says that states would be able to keep their savings, and that gives your state a direct financial incentive to cut the support that you rely on. Now, to be fair, the lawmakers behind this new act did include two protections to try and prevent another TANF scandal. States must hire an outside third party to conduct rigorous annual evaluations to see if the experiment is actually helping people or just cutting them off. The bill also says that housing money must still go to the same local agencies that handle Section 8 today. But here's the thing, an annual evaluation doesn't make sure that food keeps getting put on your table in the meantime. And even if the agencies stay the same, the rules they follow could be completely different. These protections are cold comfort if your family is going hungry in the meantime. Now, before anyone panics, I do want to say this again. This is not law yet. This is a bill, and this bill would create a pilot program, and that pilot program would allow the federal government to choose up to 5 states who would run this new program for 5 years. So this is not something that's going to universally change benefits nationwide overnight. But it is something that everyone needs to know about right now, because once proposals like this are made and pilot programs start, they don't always stay pilots. So let's talk about what you can do, because there are actually a few things you can do right now. I believe that knowledge is your best defense. You can go to congress.gov, search for the bills, and sign up for email alerts so that you'll know if this bill moves out of committee or heads to a vote or if any action is taken. Of course, I've enabled those notifications for myself too, so you could just subscribe here and we'll keep you updated as well. But don't wait for your state to become a test subject with this. You can call the congressional switchboard at the number that you see right over there. Tell your representatives and senators that you support fixing the benefit cliff, but you oppose any bill that allows states to waive federal oversight or turn food assistance into a capped block grant. This isn't just about politics. It's about whether or not you can feed your family. If you found this helpful, please like and share this video. The more people who know about the Upward Mobility Act, the harder it will be for them to change your benefits in the dark. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.